Hello, welcome to Dreaming of History. On the cool morning of October 27, 1858, Theodore Roosevelt entered the world in a brownstone home on East 20th Street in New York City. Outside, horse-drawn carriages rolled slowly over cobblestone streets. Merchants opened their shops, and the growing city buzzed with the promise of a new day. Few could have imagined that this small child would one day become one of the most energetic and influential presidents in American history. The Roosevelt family was wealthy and respected, but young Theodore's early years were far from easy. From infancy, he suffered from severe asthma. Nights were often the most difficult. He would wake struggling to breathe, gasping for air, while his worried parents stayed close beside him. In an era before modern medicine, there were few treatments that could offer lasting relief. His father, Theodore Roosevelt Sr., refused to let his son's illness define his future. He believed that although Theodore's body was weak, his spirit could become strong. One day, he offered advice that Theodore would remember for the rest of his life. "You have the mind," he said gently, "but you have not the body. You must make your body." These simple words became a lifelong challenge. Instead of surrendering to his illness, Theodore embraced exercise with determination. He lifted homemade weights, practiced boxing, rowed boats, and climbed hills whenever his health allowed. Progress came slowly, but with each passing year, his body grew stronger, and so did his confidence. When he was not exercising, Theodore immersed himself in books. Unlike many children his age, he found endless fascination in the natural world. Birds, insects, mammals, and reptiles captured his imagination. He carefully collected specimens, observed animals with remarkable patience, and recorded his discoveries in detailed notebooks. His bedroom gradually transformed into what he proudly called his Roosevelt Museum of Natural History. Shelves filled with feathers, bones, shells, and preserved animals reflected the curiosity of a young boy eager to understand the world around him. Every object told a story, and every new discovery inspired another question. Because of his fragile health, Theodore received much of his education at home. His parents hired tutors who introduced him to history, literature, geography, languages, and science. He quickly developed a remarkable memory and an insatiable appetite for learning. Whether reading about ancient civilizations, great explorers, or remarkable leaders, Theodore imagined himself living lives of courage and adventure. Travel also played an important role in his education. The Roosevelt family visited Europe and the Middle East, exposing Theodore to cultures, landscapes, and historical sites that deepened his understanding of the wider world. Ancient ruins, grand cathedrals, towering mountains, and distant seas left lasting impressions upon his young mind. As Theodore entered his teenage years, the United States itself was undergoing dramatic change. The Civil War had ended only a few years earlier. Railroads stretched across the continent, industries expanded rapidly, and millions of immigrants arrived seeking new opportunities. America was becoming larger, wealthier, and more complex. Watching his country transform inspired Theodore to think beyond his own ambitions. He believed that knowledge should serve a greater purpose, and that every citizen had a responsibility to contribute to society. These ideas would remain with him throughout his life. By the time he reached adulthood, the sickly child who once struggled for every breath had become a young man filled with confidence, discipline, and determination. The challenges of his early years had not weakened him. Instead, they had taught him perseverance, self-control, and an unwavering belief that obstacles could be overcome through effort. Little did he know that the greatest joys and deepest sorrows of his life still lay ahead. In 1876, Theodore Roosevelt enrolled at Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Leaving behind the familiar streets of New York, he entered one of America's most prestigious institutions, eager to expand his knowledge and prepare for a meaningful life. Harvard was a place of lively discussion and intellectual curiosity. Students debated politics, philosophy, literature, and science late into the evening. Theodore embraced every opportunity to learn. His interests seemed limitless, ranging from biology and history to public affairs and economics. Although naturally energetic, he never allowed himself to become arrogant. He respected those who worked hard, regardless of their background, and believed that true education required both discipline and humility. During his years at Harvard, Theodore experienced another life-changing event. At a social gathering, he met a graceful young woman named Alice Hathaway Lee. She possessed a gentle smile, quiet confidence, and warm personality that immediately captivated him. Theodore quickly fell in love. Their courtship unfolded through letters, conversations, and long walks together. Friends noticed how happy he became whenever Alice was nearby. After several years of growing affection, the couple married on October 27, 1880, Theodore's 22nd birthday. The newlyweds looked forward to building a life together. Theodore had recently graduated from Harvard and begun studying law, though his growing interest in public service soon led him toward politics instead. Elected to the New York State Assembly at only 23 years old, he quickly earned a reputation as a fearless reformer who challenged corruption wherever he found it. For a time, life seemed filled with promise. Theodore enjoyed both a successful political career and a loving marriage. Then, in February 1884, everything changed. On February 12th, Alice gave birth to their first child, a daughter also named Alice. Theodore was overwhelmed with joy. Yet the happiness lasted only hours. Alice's health suddenly deteriorated due to kidney disease that had gone undiagnosed. As Theodore rushed between rooms caring for both his wife and his mother, another tragedy unfolded. His mother, Martha Bullock Roosevelt, was dying from typhoid fever. Within a single day, Theodore lost both women he loved most. His mother died first. Only hours later, Alice passed away at the age of 22. The grief was almost beyond words. In his diary that evening, Theodore drew a large black X across the page and wrote only a single sentence: "The light has gone out of my life." Unable to bear the memories that surrounded him, Theodore left New York and entrusted the care of his infant daughter to his sister. Seeking solitude, he traveled west to the Dakota Territory, where endless prairies and distant horizons offered a chance to heal. There, far from politics and society, he hoped to rebuild not only his future, but also his spirit. The Dakota Badlands stretched endlessly beneath vast blue skies. Rolling grasslands met rugged cliffs carved by wind and time, while herds of cattle wandered across the open prairie. For Theodore Roosevelt, this wild landscape became a place of healing. He purchased ranches along the Little Missouri River and embraced the demanding life of a cowboy. Each day began before sunrise. He rode horses across great distances, repaired fences, rounded up cattle, and learned to survive in one of America's harshest environments. The work was physically exhausting, but Theodore welcomed every challenge. The hardships of ranch life strengthened both his body and his character. He no longer saw himself as a grieving widower, but as someone capable of beginning again. The cowboys who worked beside him initially viewed the educated Easterner with skepticism, yet Roosevelt quickly earned their respect. He never expected others to perform tasks he would not do himself. Whether riding through freezing snowstorms or sleeping beneath the open sky, he shared the same hardships as everyone else. The wilderness also deepened his appreciation for nature. Roosevelt spent countless hours observing wildlife, studying animal behavior, and exploring rivers, forests, and hills. His lifelong passion for conservation quietly took root during these peaceful years on the frontier. But nature could also be unforgiving. The winter of 1886-1887 brought devastating blizzards that killed thousands of cattle across the northern plains. Roosevelt's ranching business suffered enormous losses, effectively ending his dreams of becoming a successful cattleman. Rather than viewing the experience as failure, he accepted it as another lesson in resilience. Returning to New York, Theodore resumed public service with renewed confidence. The hardships of the West had transformed him into a stronger, more determined leader. Soon, he was appointed to the United States Civil Service Commission, where he fought government corruption and championed honest public administration. Later, as president of New York City's Board of Police Commissioners, Roosevelt became famous for walking the streets late at night, inspecting officers personally and ensuring they carried out their duties faithfully. His energy and commitment impressed both supporters and critics. By 1897, President William McKinley appointed Theodore Roosevelt as Assistant Secretary of the Navy. He threw himself into strengthening America's naval forces, believing the nation should always be prepared to defend itself. When war with Spain erupted in 1898, Roosevelt resigned his government position and organized the first United States Volunteer Cavalry, better known as the Rough Riders. Composed of cowboys, ranchers, hunters, Native Americans, athletes, and adventurers, the Rough Riders became one of the most celebrated volunteer regiments in American history. Their courageous charge during the Battle of San Juan Hill captured the imagination of the nation. Newspapers praised Roosevelt's bravery, and millions of Americans came to see him as a symbol of courage, determination, and leadership. The shy boy who had once struggled to breathe had become a national hero. Before long, that newfound fame would carry Theodore Roosevelt all the way to the White House. The victory in the Spanish-American War transformed Theodore Roosevelt into one of the most admired men in the United States. Newspapers celebrated his courage, artists painted his portrait, and crowds gathered wherever he appeared. His energetic personality and reputation for honesty inspired people from every corner of the nation. In 1898, Roosevelt was elected governor of New York. Although he had hoped to bring reform to state government, his determination often placed him at odds with powerful political leaders. He challenged corruption, demanded fair treatment for workers, and believed that government should serve ordinary citizens rather than wealthy interests alone. Some influential politicians found Roosevelt difficult to control. Hoping to move him into a less influential role, party leaders encouraged him to accept the nomination for vice president under President William McKinley in the election of 1900. At first, Roosevelt hesitated. The vice presidency was widely regarded as a quiet office with little real authority. Nevertheless, he accepted the nomination and helped secure a decisive victory in the general election. For only a few months, Roosevelt carried out the routine duties of vice president. Then, in September 1901, tragedy struck. While attending the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York, President William McKinley was shot by an assassin. Although doctors initially believed he might recover, his condition worsened over the following days. On September 14, 1901, McKinley died. At just 42 years of age, Theodore Roosevelt took the oath of office, becoming the youngest president in American history. Standing quietly in a private home in Buffalo, Roosevelt promised to continue the work of his predecessor while faithfully serving the Constitution. There were no grand celebrations, only a solemn understanding that immense responsibility had suddenly fallen upon his shoulders. Many Americans wondered whether the energetic former cowboy possessed the experience needed to lead the nation. Roosevelt quickly answered those doubts through action. He believed deeply in what he called the square deal, a simple idea that government should treat workers, businesses, and consumers fairly. He did not oppose successful companies simply because they were large. Instead, he opposed businesses that abused their power or acted unfairly. At the beginning of the 20th century, enormous corporations known as trusts controlled large parts of the American economy. Some companies fixed prices, crushed competitors, and influenced politics through their immense wealth. Roosevelt believed that no individual or corporation should stand above the law. His administration brought legal action against several powerful monopolies, earning him the nickname the Trust Buster. Although he actually allowed many honest businesses to continue operating freely, he insisted that corporations obey federal law and compete fairly. Roosevelt also worked to improve the lives of ordinary Americans. When coal miners went on strike in 1902, millions of families feared they would face winter without fuel for heating their homes. Previous presidents had often sided immediately with business owners during labor disputes. Roosevelt chose a different path. He invited both the mine owners and labor leaders to the White House, encouraging negotiation instead of conflict. While he did not grant every demand made by the workers, his willingness to act as an impartial mediator marked a new approach to presidential leadership. Consumer safety also became one of Roosevelt's priorities. Reports of unsanitary conditions inside meatpacking factories shocked the nation. Roosevelt ordered investigations, leading Congress to pass the Meat Inspection Act and the Pure Food and Drug Act in 1906. These new laws helped ensure that food and medicines met higher standards of safety and quality. To Roosevelt, government existed not to control every aspect of daily life, but to protect citizens from dishonesty and abuse. His energetic leadership reshaped the presidency itself. Rather than waiting for Congress to take the initiative, Roosevelt believed the president should actively guide the nation whenever the Constitution allowed it. By the middle of his presidency, Theodore Roosevelt had become one of the most recognizable leaders in the world. Yet beyond politics and reform, another passion remained close to his heart: a love for the natural beauty of America that had first taken root during his lonely years in the Dakota wilderness. Long before Theodore Roosevelt entered the White House, he had discovered something deeply peaceful in the natural world. Whether watching birds in his childhood, riding horseback across the Dakota plains, or quietly exploring forests at sunrise, he believed that nature offered both beauty and wisdom. As president, Roosevelt feared that America's forests, rivers, and wildlife were disappearing at an alarming pace. Logging companies cleared ancient woodlands, hunters killed animals without limits, and expanding industries threatened landscapes that had remained untouched for centuries. He believed future generations deserved the opportunity to experience these wild places, just as he had. Determined to protect America's natural heritage, Roosevelt launched one of the greatest conservation efforts in the nation's history. Working closely with naturalist Gifford Pinchot, he greatly expanded the national forest system. Millions of acres of woodland were placed under federal protection, ensuring that forests would be managed wisely rather than exploited without restraint. Roosevelt also created dozens of national wildlife refuges, providing safe habitats for birds and other animals whose populations had declined dramatically. He signed legislation establishing national monuments to preserve extraordinary landscapes and important historical sites. Towering rock formations, ancient forests, deserts, and archaeological treasures were protected for generations yet unborn. By the end of his presidency, Roosevelt had conserved approximately 230 million acres of public land, an achievement unmatched by any president before him. Yet Roosevelt's love of nature was never simply about numbers or policies. Whenever possible, he escaped Washington and ventured into the wilderness. He climbed mountains beneath crisp blue skies. He hiked through quiet forests where sunlight filtered gently through towering trees. He camped beside rivers whose waters reflected the stars. These journeys refreshed his mind and reminded him why conservation mattered. One memorable camping trip brought Roosevelt together with famed naturalist John Muir in California's Yosemite Valley. Beneath giant sequoias and towering granite cliffs, the two men spent several days discussing the future of America's wilderness. Muir urged Roosevelt to protect these magnificent landscapes from commercial development. Roosevelt listened carefully. Their conversations strengthened his determination to preserve places like Yosemite and other national parks for all people, not merely for those living in his own time. He often explained that natural resources should be used wisely rather than wasted carelessly. "The nation behaves well," Roosevelt once observed, "if it treats the natural resources as assets, which it must turn over to the next generation increased and not impaired in value." His conservation efforts reflected a broader philosophy. To Roosevelt, civilization and wilderness were not enemies. Prosperity and progress could exist alongside forests, rivers, wildlife, and open landscapes if managed responsibly. Today, millions of visitors continue to enjoy the national parks, forests, wildlife refuges, and protected lands that Roosevelt helped preserve. The quiet trails, towering mountains, and peaceful lakes remain living reminders of a president who believed that some treasures should never be measured by wealth alone. As Theodore Roosevelt guided reforms at home, he also sought to strengthen America's position abroad. The beginning of the 20th century was an era of expanding international trade, growing naval power, and increasing competition among the world's great nations. Roosevelt believed the United States should play a larger role in global affairs while seeking peace whenever possible. His foreign policy became known through a simple phrase: "Speak softly and carry a big stick." To Roosevelt, true diplomacy required both patience and strength. A nation respected by others was more likely to prevent conflict than invite it. One of his greatest achievements was supporting the construction of the Panama Canal. For centuries, sailors had dreamed of a passage connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Ships otherwise faced the long and dangerous journey around the southern tip of South America. Under Roosevelt's leadership, construction finally moved forward. Thousands of workers carved a canal through dense jungle, mountains, and swamps. Although the project faced enormous engineering and medical challenges, its completion transformed global trade and dramatically shortened international shipping routes. Roosevelt also worked to expand the strength of the United States Navy. In 1907, he sent 16 gleaming battleships on a remarkable voyage around the world. Painted bright white, the fleet became known as the Great White Fleet. The journey demonstrated America's growing naval capability, while also serving as a peaceful display of national confidence. Crowds gathered in ports across the globe to watch the impressive ships arrive. Roosevelt hoped that visible strength would encourage stability rather than war. His commitment to diplomacy earned international recognition in 1906 when he received the Nobel Peace Prize for helping mediate the end of the Russo-Japanese War. It was the first time an American president had received the prestigious honor. Roosevelt considered peace not as weakness, but as one of humanity's greatest achievements. As his second presidential term gradually approached its end, he prepared to leave office, knowing that new adventures and new challenges still awaited him beyond the White House.